Carrie Guerin Scoggins Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition Update. Quite some time back, the Democratic Party and the Clinton administration wrote a piece of legislation called Goals 2000. Goals 2000 did not pass the United States legislature due to a separation of church and state violation, and they wanted it to be a hate crime to teach your children the biblical references to homosexuality. Teaching one's child the biblical references to homosexuality is a civil right. It was a separation of church and state violation to write into the legislation that it would now be considered a hate crime for parents to teach their children Romans chapter 1 or any other biblical reference to homosexuality, painting it as sin or sinful lifestyle. After our elected representatives rejected this piece of legislation, after scrutinizing it, finding a separation of church and state violation, Goals 2000 was then accepted by the UN Rights of the Child in the United Nations. It became a charter in the UN Rights of the Child. As the United Nations has no separation of church and state, protection for Christian civil rights, which would stop religious censorship. Congress shall pass no law on the establishment of religion. The separation of church and state keeps the state out of the church, stopping Bible censorship or any form of religious censorship, and this includes what goes on inside our homes. That parents have the full legal right to teach their children the biblical references to homosexuality. Parents teaching their children their religious beliefs, of course including Romans chapter 1 if their religion is the King James Bible or Christianity, is fully legal. The Federal Supreme Court upheld the Christian Church's legal right to adhere to, quote, core values. That includes Romans chapter 1. This decision was made concerning the church's legal right to only hire on those that adhere to their religious beliefs in their sect or group. This is the law, and it includes the Christian's free legal right to practice Romans chapter 1, to preach it, teach it, and not have their doctrine censored, even down to choosing those that will work in their ministry or leadership or that are hired on in their businesses. They have the legal right to make sure that those that are around them and in their group adhere to Romans chapter 1 as part of their religious core values. This also includes parents teaching their children their core values and their religious beliefs. And again, it includes Romans chapter 1 and biblical references to homosexuality. Parental rights laws also prohibit the state from infringing on the parents' rights to teach their children their religion, their way, with their doctrine and theology. The Democrats' attempts to criminalize Christianity have failed. It would violate the separation of church and state for any aspect of one's religious beliefs to be censored by the state, in the separation of church and state, keeping the state out of the church, and stopping religious censorship. Unfortunately, the United Nations does not have this constitutional protection. Signing on to the global court would cost the United States citizens their freedom of religious worship. Signing on to the UN Global Court would allow the United Nations the legal right to censor any religious group that they deem offensive. They are a Marxist state. They believe in working for the, quote, collective good. If they deem it's for the collective good, they have the legal right to do so. We should not sign on to the global court and lose our constitutional civil rights. The United States is not a Marxist state. We have a constitution that defends our civil liberties and protects the right of the individual, as Thomas Jefferson described. The reason that our founding fathers did not support Marxism was Thomas Jefferson said, working for the collective good squelches out the right of the individual. When the right of the individual is put away for this, quote, collective good, one loses their civil rights. The UN so-called Constitution is so vague, it leaves civil rights and civil rights issues arbitrary to the situation and whatever the United Nations deems. Even though the United Nations has been made fully well aware that the American Medical Association has again said that there are no gay genes, no clump of genes creating a homosexual, no epigenetic markers that cut on a gay gene, and that there are no proof they're born gay. And this was again heard in the Federal Supreme Court in the United States under DOMA, preventing the Federal Supreme Court from deeming homosexuality as a civil right in that they're not born gay, therefore their refusal to hear Proposition 8, passing it down to a high state court. The United Nations wants to usurp the United States Constitution and our separation of church and state to censor Bible scriptures on homosexuality. This is closely akin to the Nazi Germany Good Speak laws, making Judaism and Christianity criminalized, censoring scriptures on homosexuality, where a regiment in the Nazi military called the Brown Shirts, an all-homosexual regiment, helped de-Christianize the population and criminalize the Bible and the Torah, Judaic law, and therefore give them the right to arrest Christians and Jews and put them in the concentration camps. The United Nations has no separation of church and state, preventing Bible censorship or censorship of the Torah, Judaic law, biblical references to homosexuality. It was not until Adolf Hitler decided that homosexuality was genetic and from a defective gene that he decided the homosexuals too should be arrested, incarcerated, and their bad gene eradicated from mankind through the Holocaust. Up until that point, the homosexual regiment, the Brown Shirts, had been arresting Christians and Jews for their religious beliefs, the biblical references to homosexuality, referring to homosexuality as sin, for violating the Good Speak laws. The Nazi Good Speak laws were closely akin to the hate speech laws that was brought up by the Democrats, Obama and Pelosi, in the hate crimes legislation, now overturned by the Federal Supreme Court, as unconstitutional, upholding our legal right to, quote, debate the issue. The United States citizens now have the full legal right to debate the issue on every issue, including homosexuality, and from a biblical standpoint. The United Nations hate speech laws and anti-blaspheming laws both violate the United States free speech rights and separation of church and state. In the United States, we have the legal right to debate the issue, even that of Islam. The anti-blaspheming laws in the United Nations prohibits their citizens that have signed on to the global court from legally having the right to debate Islam. It criminalizes saying anything against Islam, the Quran, or Muhammad, as well as their hate speech laws. The United States Federal Supreme Court overturned these hate speech laws and upheld our legal rights to debate the issue, including the rights to debate other religions, as well as the full legal right to quote the whole entire Bible without censorship, as the hate speech laws violated our United States separation of church and state, keeping the state out of the church, and stopping religious censorship, and stopping the state from criminalizing the legal right to debate the issue, including debating other religions such as Islam. If the United States signs on to the UN Global Court, it will usurp our constitutional civil rights of separation of church and state, freedom of speech and freedom of religious speech, and be akin to bringing in Nazi good speak laws here into the United States. The World Council of Churches being intertwined with the United Nations also violates the United States separation of church and state. The World Council of Churches is made up primarily now of New Agers and Islam. Recently, it was said in the World Council of Churches that Christianity is now to be considered, quote, the enemy. It's closely akin to that propaganda spread in pre-Nazi Germany against the Christians and Jews. They have no protection in the UN of their religious free speech rights, as the United Nations has now criminalized part of the Bible, the biblical references on homosexuality, including that in Goals 2000 that was written by the Clintons and the Democratic Party that was accepted into the UN Rights of the Child, where parents could be arrested for a hate crime for teaching their children the biblical references to homosexuality. Again, this is closely akin to the Nazi good speak laws. Our United States Constitution prevents us from having state-approved church sermons, state-approved Bibles, censored by the state. The United Nations does not have this protection. Our federal Supreme Court knew this in overturning the hate speech laws and upholding the citizens' legal right to debate the issue, including that of Romans chapter 1, and debating any issue from a biblical Christian standpoint or the standpoint of Judaic law, stopping the criminalization of Christianity and Judaism, preventing the United States from turning into Nazi Germany. The United Nations does not have this provision in their so-called Constitution. Our United States Constitution prevents a board or bureau or government agency or a council set up to censor our Bible, working for the collective good as they deem what is for the collective good, stopping this Marxist censorship here in the United States. We do not have a state-approved Bible. We do not have state-approved church sermons. We do not have state-approved religious beliefs that we can teach our children. We do not have Nazi-style good speak laws or hate speech laws here in the United States. We have freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. Our federal Supreme Court did not find a freedom from religion. Tolerance is expected to those that oppose the Christian viewpoint and wish to censor the Bible. Scriptures on homosexuality have not been censored from the King James Bible or the Christian faith, nor from the Torah and Judaism. Judaism and Christianity has not been criminalized in the United States. It is a freedom of religion, a separation of church and state, keeping the state out of the church, keeping the state from censoring the Bible or the Torah, and supporting our free speech rights and our legal right to debate the issue. The federal Supreme Court upheld the Christians' and the Jews' legal right to adhere to, quote, core values, biblical laws, including biblical scriptures on homosexuality. Parental rights laws also stop the state from infringing the rights of parents to teach their children their personal religious beliefs in its entirety without censorship. The mere fact that the Democratic Party has for so long been attempting to censor Christianity and Judaism through hate speech laws, Goals 2000, and other legislation such as bullying legislation and the no-hate legislation, trying to bring in Bible censorship and censorship of Judaism and the Torah, shows their hostility and intolerance towards Christianity and Judaism, and it's teaching their children to be intolerant. There is no freedom from religion in the United States. our federal Supreme Court did not find a freedom from religion. Our founding fathers quoted the Bible over 15,000 times, documented, while they were on government land and while they were government employees on the clock, so to speak. They opened and closed all of their sessions making our laws with prayers unto God, and then proceeded to quote the Bible throughout these sessions. Again, they were on government land when they did so, and they were government employees at the time and were on the clock working as paid government employees. This shows that their intent was never a freedom from religion, and our federal Supreme Court did not find a freedom from religion. Tolerance was expected. Our founding fathers expected others to be tolerant of their Christian faith, of the various denominations represented, and even of those that were non-Christian ideals brought forth, as some of our founding fathers were deists. Censorship is the opposite of tolerance, and it teaches and breeds more intolerance. Attempts to censor Christianity and Judaism furthers the cause to breed intolerance against the Christians and Jews. Remember these facts when you vote, and keep in mind the Democratic Party platform is anti-Christian at its core. With the UN rights of the child now accepting Goals 2000 that violated separation of church and state in another attempt by Democrats to bring in anti-Christian censorship, stopping parents from teaching their children the biblical references to homosexuality, and the United Nations having hate speech laws and anti-blaspheming laws that go against our constitutional civil rights of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and what the federal Supreme Court upheld as our legal right to debate the issue when overturning the hate speech laws as unconstitutional. Remembering when you vote that if one runs as a Democrat, they have to support the Democratic Party platform if they take money from the party. Keep this in mind when you vote. And remember, what's on the Democratic Party platform is anti-Christian. The federal Supreme Court did not find a freedom from religion. The federal Supreme Court upheld the Christians' legal right to, quote, debate the issues when overturning the hate speech laws. Christians have the legal right to adhere to core values according to federal Supreme Court rulings. This has been another edition of Carrie Guerin-Scoggins' Political Newsletter Bible Prophecy Times Edition Update. Look for more information, Carrie Guerin-Scoggins' Political Newsletter and Carrie Guerin-Scoggins' Political Newsletter Bible Prophecy Times Edition, Facebook pages and bloggers.